So over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to discuss all your feature work, but I want to start with the 2018 documentary, The Other Monk, that you directed with your brother Emil.
Yeah.
It follows the novelist Karl Ove Knausgård around Norway over the 6 months leading up to the exhibition that he was presenting of the late works of the artists. And there's a moment in that film that you say he shows us what it's like to remember, which is one of the greatest things to achieve in film. And all of your films deal in some way with memory, much more than many other filmmakers that I can think of. I'm just curious, at what point in time, if you can remember, did this fascination with memory start to play on you?
It started when I was very young. Can you all hear me? Is it okay? Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually true. It started when I was in kindergarten. I was probably like 4 years old or something. I remember sitting on a bike, like a three-wheeler, you know, like a little play bike, and thinking, I've decided I will remember this for the rest of my life. And I think it's very natural. I have kids that age myself, and I think it's something we all do more or less consciously, that the moment we start experiencing autonomy as individuals, the moment we start understanding that we are alone in the world as an individual, we also start creating a sense of narrative about who we are. The idea of identity, really, it plays into this idea of memory, because we are kind of all individual recording units, and we understand what subjectivity is. And I think it sounds terribly maybe pretentious or academic, so forgive me, but I think actually as a kid, I was very concerned with that. I was curious, what is that thing, that memory? And I still remember that moment. I decided to. And in a strange way, years later, I realized that's kind of what a camera does. You know, it records something, and I can see Anders Danielsen Lee, who's a dear friend of mine and an actor, and I see he gets older in the films we make. He's still quite young and beautiful, but you know what I mean. It's, you know,
and we hate him for it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. So I think memory and being obsessed with film, and being very interested in what this idea of identity is, all of that is tied together for me. So it's kind of hard to untangle it sometimes. What it means.
It's fascinating how you present memory, because you say that the camera records memories, but in the same way that someone doesn't necessarily misremember something, but remembers it a different way to you. The same event, the same thing's happening, but it's presented differently. Likewise with a camera, you choose to point a camera in a certain position at something specific that someone would point elsewhere. And this is definitely a recurring theme in your work, this idea that we'll be presented with a memory, but that memory isn't necessarily reality. Your reality is far removed from the emotional truth of the characters.
Yeah. Yeah, again, the idea of subjectivity and trying to inquire into how does consciousness work. That sounds a bit trippy, but I mean it literally. Like I know I've done sequences that I've written with my dear friend Eskil Vogt, who I always write with, where we're like, how can we get into the head of the characters? Sometimes you can do it through montages, stream of consciousness stuff, or playing around with that, or you can try to convey it through just observation of people and trying to get to that limit of understanding, but also realizing that we don't quite understand each other, and that's when interpretation comes into play. So that's also interesting. But that subjectivity thing is interesting. I mean, to be honest with you, I think very simply, anyone who's picked up a camera and wanted to kind of tell a story or show a human experience encounters the fact that filming someone turns them into an object immediately. They become something in that image that moves around. And therefore, I find it virtuous and interesting in movies to get into the biggest absence in the picture, which is what's not shown, what is going on inside that human being, what is the emotion of that human being. So I think that's something that triggers me. I'm curious about that.
So we're going to see some examples this evening of how you achieve that. But again, this fascination with memory, this earliest memory you have of remembering, at what point did that translate into this idea that a camera can do a similar thing and you would like to use a camera?
I think it happened very early. I was fortunate because I grew up in a family where my grandfather was a filmmaker. And he didn't really get to do so many films. So I think there was a sense of grief around him, that he was kind of this failed genius in a way. And my mother was affected by that in many ways. It was her father. My mother met my father because my father was doing sound for my grandfather. And my grandfather said to my mom, his daughter, that Danish sound guy, be careful with him. And then a year later I was born. And they were very young, and they were into movies. And I remember playing with my dad, and he showed me how to shoot on Super 8. And some years later, when video cameras arrived, and they were very exclusive, it was nothing that people owned yet, that he would borrow something from a production company and take it home for a weekend, and we would try to use it. And at the same time, I also had a record, like a tape recorder, sound, and I would record stuff in my life and show it to someone. So again, this idea of documenting and trying to get attention through that was interesting, I thought.
Your mother was also, at some point, involved as a script supervisor and assistant editor in film. So being in that
a director
environment-
as well. She also directed, yeah.
And just to say that your grandfather, Eric Logan, made a film in 1972 called Remonstrance, which is an experimental film comprised of 6 reels that you can play in any specific order.
Yeah. He was very affected by being captured during the war and being in the resistance, and became very politically engaged as a socialist, kind of a social democratic socialist after the war. And he felt that the news media was giving us narratives that at times were untrue or one-sided, and he wanted art to be an open place for interpretation. So he thought, in a kind of left-wing spirit, that he would make a film with 5 reels, and that every projectionist or any audience member could come in and demand a new order of those reels, and they would create a unique movie to engage with an audience. And I still find that rather sympathetic and sweet. And I have tried. Now it exists, at least in Norway, on DVD, so you can choose the order. And it's very clear that there's one order that works better than all the others. But it's still a sweet idea that someone should pick up again, I think.
Let's move on to Eskil, your co-screenwriter, who you've been working with since your early shorts. Mm-hmm. How did you first encounter each other?
We were working in a Norwegian game show. I think you have something similar in the UK called All or Nothing, where you could go and you could say, I want to talk about Walt Disney or Greek mythology, and they would raise the amount, and you could take the money out, leave, or go to the next difficult question. So that was live TV on a Saturday night, just to make some money. We were cable dashers. We were behind the camera. And one day I met Eskil there, and there was kind of a pecking order over lunch that we would eat together and the camera people would eat together. And I looked at him with his Doc Martens and his long, wavy, golden hair and leather jacket, and I thought he was a bit, I don't know, studentish, and I was kind of into skateboard and punk, and I didn't know if we would really become friends, but it turned out he was a film geek like me, and he loved American indies, and we discussed Hal Hartley movies and Godard and Buñuel, and suddenly we were kind of best friends. And then when I was a couple of years later, we were kind of 18, I think, and then a couple of years later I saved up money to make my first short on 16 to try to get into film school, and he came along and helped, and that's kind of where our collaboration began.
And has your process changed over the years, or do you still work in a similar way?
No, it's changed quite a bit, and I mean, now we write together. He's not on set necessarily, but I still carry that spirit of that collaboration as being very important, and always an essential starting point for every film. And he also comes in towards the latter half of editing and gives me good pointers about everything I fucked up and how to get it back in shape. So that's good.
So he went off to study in Paris, film in Paris. And you first of all attended the European Film College in Denmark, but then came to National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield, just up the road. And you continued that partnership there. I know you had a really great time the NFTS?
Yes, looking back, I certainly did, and those were very important years in my life. But it was also a battle. I mean, it wasn't an easy school. You know, I came with all my love for Tarkovsky and Antonioni movies, and the National Social Realist and TV School, like we like to call it, was very interested in Ken Loach movies, you know, that I realized when I saw Kess, that I also love, by the way. I adore Ken Loach, so I don't want to say anything negative about that genius. And also an important social voice. So, but at the time I was more formally oriented. But I think they got me to understand that character stories and human stories and to encounter this experience of working with a lot of actors completely changed me and shaped me as a director. So looking back, it was a wonderful time. But another thing was I felt like writing my own stuff with Eskil, and we were supposed to write with the writing students, but they allowed us actually to do that. So we made some short films. But I also have to say on that note that being in this room is kind of a beautiful thing, because this is where we had our graduation screenings, and so this is like kind of the room where I sat and looked at, you know, my final short film and was super nervous, and I had no idea I would be sitting like this in front of you all. Even having made one feature film, I wasn't sure at all how this would all pan out. So I'm very grateful, and I had to add another anecdote, because that night, one of the big deals of the graduation screening, which was for a film I made called Still, which was overly experimental. It had tons of time layers, and maybe it didn't quite work, but at least we were trying to do some montage, stream of consciousness, short filmmaking. And the producer on the film, who was in school, but Anna Wolf, who was a very accomplished already producer at the time, had started working in the industry and knew that my biggest wish was to meet Nicholas Roeg. So she invited him, and he accepted. So Nicholas Roeg came to our graduation screening in this room and saw my film and met me afterwards. And he's one of my all-time heroes. He's passed away now, which is terribly sad, but he made some wonderful films. And I remember that our editor, who I still work with, that also went to the National, Olivier Bouguer-Couttet, and his editing style has meant a lot for the films that we do. And him being a big Nicholas Roeg fan was on the other side of the room out in the cafe when I was with Nicholas Roeg and the producers and some other people. And Nicholas Roeg was a senior man at the time, and we were waving at Olivier to come over and meet him. And Olivier was like, he thought he was someone's grandfather, so he didn't really bother. He was talking to someone, and later realized that he missed his shot. So that's a running joke with us, how we missed Nicholas Roeg at the NFT.
I'm going to disagree with you slightly on this when you talk about Still. Pieter, Still, and Proctor, your three early shorts, are actually available to watch on YouTube.
Oh, no. Really?
And they are remarkably assured.
Are they?
They really are. They're quite extraordinary. And I'm going to come back to Still a little later in relation to one of the more recent films you've made. But let's jump forward to 2006 and your feature debut, Reprise, comes out. How early did you start working with Eskil on the idea behind that?
Ooh, that was first. I ended film school in 2001, 2002, and then we started working on a big kind of thriller in English language, which had like 15 layers of lies and deceit and all kinds of things. And at the time, you know, like Christopher Nolan, we didn't know who he was yet. It hadn't kind of happened yet. And I thought, for some silly reason, that I was going to kind of try to do the big genre experimental time layer kind of movies. But then we just couldn't figure that script out at all. And slowly these personal anecdotes from our kind of longing back to the time we had in Oslo when we were younger, and the type of guys that we knew, and a lot of material from our life started just happening, and we started writing that kind of as a side project, just for fun. And that turned into the script for Reprise, and we realized, shit, this is what we should do. And it was kind of shameful, but it was the most important thing that happened, that we started doing kind of more personal type stories about people not that it was exactly us, but we realized we were revealing personal themes, curiosities, longings, And I think that made for better material than all our fancy ideas.
It does feel, what's quite wonderful about the film, I remember reading an interview with the Coen brothers where they talked about writing ideas on scraps of paper, and there was the drawer, this cabinet, the bottom drawer just had all these ideas in. And every now and again, not when they were stuck, but when they just thought, need something else, they sort of sift through and find some ideas. And your debut feels like all these different ideas pulled together, but with a remarkable through line. How long did it take you to work out, first of all, the duration of the plot, which kind of spans quite a long period?
I have a feeling maybe that there are filmmakers here, so I'll share how ridiculous our journey was in hope that we can all feel, you know, it's complicated to make movies, and I'm sure many of you feel this also. So we started with, we thought going from short films to features, we needed a lot of material. So we had so much stuff. We wrote notes on scenes and concepts and characters, and by the end of it, I'm sure we could have had 10 seasons of a TV show, you know, easily. And then we started making it into a line, and we realized by the proportion that the screenplay would be, 10 seasons of a you know, TV show. And we were trying to do a feature film. So we had to rewrite it again and again, and it took us several years, actually. I think we worked on and off for maybe 4 or 5 years on this script before we got to make it. And you're absolutely right. It was full of formal ideas, like stuff kind of childishly that I just wanted to show you. I wanted there to be this way of cutting scene together, or this way of shooting a scene, or this way of using a voiceover, and I still think that's okay. I still try to keep some of that in my approach. I was never interested in the idea of stories. I know some people are great at that, and it's great if you have like a plot twisted detective thing or something, but if you're doing character work, to have moments with characters that are hopefully an original way of someone breaking up, or an original way of falling in love, or an original way of doing, like finding a filmic version of something that's your own. That's a shape and almost like an object that you show with character, a piece of film. That's what we're always writing for. And Reprise is blatantly that. It's almost only like it's concept scenes, one after another.
How many people have seen the film?
Wow.
Okay, so some of you will be familiar with this. So at the end of your first short, Pieter, the main character says, sometimes memories are things that could never have happened. Maybe they belong to someone else. And it struck me that that feeds directly into the opening of Reprise, where we have this amazing setup of 2 young aspiring writers posting their first novels to a publishing house or to an agent. And then we see a fictional history of what happens then to their lives. Can you talk about the idea behind that opening? Because it's outrageous for a debut. It's extremely confident.
And silly.
Yeah, but it pulls you in.
I'm glad. No, I'm proud about that. I mean, I think Reprise was very inspired by more experimental types of novels and cinema. You know, Alain Robbe-Grillet, the new novel, new wave stuff, Alain René's movies, all of that kind of, the feeling that you have an infinite possibilities of doing different layerings of time and memories, and that the imagined, again, the mind, the idea of consciousness, that you can actually speak more truthfully about someone through their longing or dreams than just what happens literally to their lives. And this is something that's been an ongoing thing. This idea that so much of our life is not really what happens, but it's our dreams or hopes. What in a conversation, all the ideas that you have while you're talking to someone, and all the things you think are going to happen in your life, which becomes a part of your identity, but maybe they don't ever happen. You know, there's a wonderful British psychoanalyst called Adam Phillips who wrote a book called Missing Out that I discovered just before I wrote Worst Person in the World. And he speaks about this in very technical terms, that he finds that he's sitting there with patients, and so much of their sense of self is their imagined world rather than their lived world. And I think for anyone creative, particularly making a film about two young artists who's kind of thinks that they're going to be great and then they're probably feeling that they're not, to start the film off with a kind of slightly cliched, nouvelle vague version of young writers fantasizing about what a great artistic life's going to be, as an overture that kind of, in a strange way, sets up all the thematics of the whole film. Yeah. But then the story as real life in the film turns out is quite different. But still, on some level, still the same, which I often think is the case in life, that you have this idea of something, and maybe you're not completely off about what's going to happen to you, but it's going to happen infinitely different than you imagined. So that was the idea. It's a film about young people, you know? So their dreams are relevant.
So I can't help feeling, when I watch this scene of Philip and Eric announcing themselves to the world, of you and Eskil.
Sure.
Posting it and literally saying, this is our film.
Absolutely, and we were so ashamed of that every interview that asked, so which of you is one of each writer, and it's about a friendship of good friends, you know? We're like, no, it's not us at all, and it's all imagined. But then luckily, meeting an audience, talking to people, and realizing that, hey, they're talking back to us about thematics that we are really, we feel very close to, that we revealed ourselves, and it was a good thing. So from that film on, we learned that it's okay to take a risk and put your heart out there, and maybe they'll laugh at you, but maybe someone will get it, you know? And that's actually the bravery of being creative. The problem of the film industry is that you get this big machine around you so that everyone thinks you're invincible. But being in the middle of that machine, I mean, you know, like a film comes out and there's posters and there's a whole kind of promotion machine around it. It's in the cinemas, you know, and people pay money to see it. So everyone thinks you're goddamn confident and everything is so sorted out. But the truth, of course, if you do something that's personal, is that it's a vulnerable thing, and you don't quite know how it's all going to end up. So I think we learned a lot from that film, that's okay. That's the task. The task is to try to stay personal about what you do, even if you do it inside that machine, which is so expensive, with all those people that you have to convince to get to do it. As opposite to most of my friends who wrote books, or my creative friends, I have other friends too that aren't creative, but those who played in bands or wrote books, which was cheaper.
I think one of the reasons so many people are drawn to your films, and a reason why your films work so well, I think if they were po-faced and completely serious, they may not be so easy to handle, but from your early films, the shorts, but through your debut and then every film you've made since, humor, allowing the audience or giving the audience an opportunity to laugh with you and with the characters, I think is essential. There's one line, a voiceover about a band that plays in the film called Mondo Topless, and we're told it's the worst use of a Russ Meyer film title as a band name ever. And it's just this idea that we're constantly laughing at the characters, and sometimes with them at another character.
Yeah.
And that's been a through line in all of your work.
Yeah, I hope so. I think humor is as truthful as melancholy. You know, it's a coping mechanism to function, I think, to be able to laugh at stuff, and yeah.
And in terms of you saying you were telling stories about friends or inspired by friends, did you feel that you were making a film about a generation in perhaps the same way that Douglas Copeland was trying to with Generation X, or Richard Linklater was trying to with Slacker 10 years earlier?
I don't know what they tried. There's a few things I've always been very cautious about, and it's to make headlines about what my films are about in terms of, one is generation. I'm very cautious about that. People say it, oh, this or that is a generational portrait, and I take it as a big compliment because it means that those who say it feel that they recognize themselves in it, and I like connection through cinema. I like that idea a lot, that it's a space of being able to communicate things that we can't really talk about in our social life so easily. But to get on my soapbox and say that I'm making a generational thing, I always try to stick to characters, the same. So people will say, oh, you're making a statement about women the first time, you know, like when I had a female lead suddenly in a few of my films. And I never thought about it like gender. And I had to be cautious about what I said. You know, oh, it's about Julie, or it's about Thelma. I'm very interested in these human experiences, and they're human. And I didn't set out to do it because of some idea of representing something bigger. It's a character. And that's the freedom of doing films or stories, is that you can actually say, here's a family like Sentimental Value. And sure, I can understand that there are allegorical aspects to that. It could be looked at as a miniature society. They could be representatives of a certain class, a certain type of problems relating to that class. They could also be just individuals in any family, you know. But I have to stick to what I can control, and that's the thing. And that's where I'm a little bit cautious about it. But looking back, I also realized through these films that because I use the same city a lot, Oslo. I use some of the same actors. I see that I'm commenting on life stages, and that plays into a sense of generation. So it's not that I'm against it. I'm just very cautious about saying that was my purpose, because it's not.
You mentioned actors. We're moving on to Oslo, August the 31st. Perhaps this is a good moment to talk about Anders Danielsen Lee, who's one of the main characters in your first film and takes the lead in this film. What qualities was it that attracted you to working with him? And now he's worked with you on 4 of your 6 features.
Mm-hmm. No, he's an extraordinary actor. And I think I grew up learning how to direct performers from Anders a lot. We experimented a lot over the first films of how to get different effects out of a situation around him so that he could do something interesting. And we realized that getting him kind of out of control was interesting. And he yearned for that. So more so in Oslo, August 31st, I let things play out. And we discovered this term that he came up with, I think, called jazz takes, which, because he's a musician, that idea that we do a few takes based on the script, and then we do some looser, semi-improvised takes that still deals with the same situation, some of the same dialogue, but allowing the actors to use intuition, drop a few lines or say something else, or, you know. And I found in almost all my films that those takes have been quite special if they're ready. And Anders is very much like that. He kind of gets out of control, and that's very interesting. And I think that there's a rawness to his performance sometimes that I admire tremendously. I don't know. There aren't. Not all great actors are interested in that, but I think he is, and I am. And I think many of the actors that I work with are into that kind of thing, where it's a bit of a mystery for them as well when it happens. Something happens, an event that is triggered by a very strict set of circumstances inside a written piece on that day, with a lot of planning and thought, but losing all of that, throwing it away for something to happen in front of the camera. And that's it. That's what he does very well.
So it was that scene in the film that made me go and see Oslo, August the 31st, 3 times in 1 week, because I couldn't get my head round this intense character study that zooms out to show us what life is like in a city for many different people, and yet it's still through the prism of this character. There's so much empathy and compassion in this sequence alone, and it just confounded me the first time I saw it. I thought, how can you do this? You did it. Tell us.
Thank you. No, I don't know, man. It was interesting. I don't watch my films again, so it's moving to see it. Yeah, things have changed. People don't own all of their favorite TV show episodes anymore, do they? No, I don't know. It was a kind of a very melancholic. It's the saddest thing I'll ever do, I think, this film. But it's a discrepancy between the world is so beautiful and people are resourceful and people are smart, and then it doesn't work out, and it's so sad. I mean, haven't we all seen that in life? You know, that things don't work out for people that we admire or think we're alike, and we don't know how to bring them along with us. And I think it comes from a sense of grief, actually, this film, in a strange way. I used to be a skater. Yeah, and a lot of my friends died from heroin. So, yeah.
And it plays into the idea this isn't strictly speaking a voiceover, but in any conventional way, most of the voiceovers that populate your films aren't conventional voiceovers. They don't paper over the holes in the narrative.
True.
They don't do what Terrence Malick has been doing, which some people say is a different kind of thing. They work on an entirely different level in many ways. But each time it feels like you and Eskil are approaching the idea of the voiceover from a very different angle.
It's true. It's the strange. I've said this a few times, but in the writing room we have a big bookshelf of film books, and Sight and Sound, and Cahiers du Cinéma, and all these kinds of, you know, the admiration for the form that we love so dearly, and that I'm sure many of you do. If not, you wouldn't be sitting here, you know, in this room. The love for cinema, and then there's a couch. That we take turns lying on and talking about life. And I think between there, we try to find formal possibilities to try again to get close and intimate with human characters. So I think voiceover is such a cheap trick if it's done wrong. So we really try to find interesting ways to almost allow ourselves. I think to a certain extent we are, even though Eskil and I are terribly atheistic, we don't believe in God much, unfortunately. We wish we did, but you know, we don't. But we are also kind of post-Protestants. I think some people in this country have that feeling too, that you carry a lot of the idea of virtues and guilt and a lot of that. And I think when it comes to cinema language, we have a lot of virtues, actually, like the ideals, things we want to live up to. And I think voiceover is this kind of dialectic of, if we do it the wrong way, we'll kind of fail the film gods. You know, it'll be a cheap way out. And we really try to stay on that. Like, and we forced ourselves to try to do voiceovers that are bits of documentary interviews. We've tried to do it in Louder Than Bombs. We do one where someone reads aloud in class, and a young boy's listening, and the reading voice turns into his train of thought in a way. Then we've also tried to do different verb forms, like imagined other tenses of verbs, and it could have, it should have, and so forth. Like whatever to try to get around how to use it, but ultimately also to free the pictures to do something else. I think that's the most important thing. Voiceover, again, we're not super interested in that idea of plot and storytelling. So if you let go of some layer of storytelling through the voiceover, you can let the images be more ambivalent or open for a different type of interpretation. I think that's what it comes from. But again, as you can hear, I don't quite know what the hell we do. We're trying to figure it out every time. So.
You mentioned Louder Than Bombs, and that was your next film, and your first film fully in the English language.
Except for the shorts.
Except for the shorts, correct.
Yeah.
What was your decision to make that film at that point, at that juncture?
We actually started working on it before Oslo, August 31st.
Right.
And we couldn't get it made. It was a moment in film history around 2008 when the film industry went from all the studios made kind of indie movies. There was Warner Independent and Paramount Vantage, and they were all making more personal, less expensive films, and all of that collapsed during the financial crisis of 2008. So we had this idea that we could certainly do an equally personal film in America, and it turned out not to be so easy. So we went back to Europe and kept working on that script, which is a family story again, and it was wonderful. I remember when it came out at Cannes, it had mixed reviews, which hurt me. It was when I learned not to read reviews anymore. Not everyone hated it, but it was enough so that a lot of people didn't see it. And that's how you kill a film, you know, by people not seeing it. So I have this love now sometimes for films that come out of a big festival and someone says, it's not so good. I'm like, see it, just see it. Maybe you'll like it. You know, like, don't always agree with the critics. So, but what happens then was that people were using it against me, that we were working in English. And I remember that I felt a bit hurt by that. And I see back and I understand there's kind of supposedly a flavor to my Oslo films that I don't control, and maybe that's what people want. Fair enough. But I got to work with Gabriel Byrne and Isabelle Huppert and Jesse Eisenberg and Devin Druid and all these wonderful actors. I felt that we talked about how do we convey grief? How do we deal with sorrow? How, regarding the pain of others? It's about a war photographer and her family. I still think it's a valid film. And I saw recently that one of the papers that was really nasty to it, The Guardian, actually did a write-up of it recently because of Sentimental Value. They had an article about Louder Than Bombs being an okay film, so who knows? Maybe it'll have its spring now. I'm saying this also to my colleagues out there. You know, we all know how it is. There's always going to be some naysayers, and we have to accept that. But I felt that people, what hurt me wasn't, I mean, the film I'm happy about, so fuck it. What I was sad about was the perception that I was somehow selling out.
Yeah.
Because I've always had Final Cut. I've always worked with limitations to achieve that I can work with my friends. I can cast who I want to cast. I've done my film with my crew, with my team, with my family, you know. And I was hurt by the fact that people were insinuating that I was kind of selling out just because it was in English. I think that's what really hurt me looking back at it.
It was kind of weird. I remember reading one review. I've forgotten which outlet it was, so I just don't want to say it. And they actually said that Joachim Trier has made one of his Norwegian films in English. Why did he do that? Rather than take a film on its merits. And you watch the film, and it's extraordinary because in terms of the ellipses in time, that's there. Going back to your second short film, Still, which is about a photographer, and you're playing with the relationship there between still imagery and moving images, and it's just you've taken it much further with this film. I find it quite extraordinary that people would see it as an outlier in your work because there's so many elements. You can look back to the first two films and say, I know where you're going, or you're trying to try something different here. But they do work of a piece, which I find quite extraordinary. Following that, though, we move on to Thelma, which is, I'm right in saying, is in many ways you and Eskil diving headfirst into the world of genre filmmaking, but then making it your own.
Yeah, that's true. Thelma is a supernatural thriller to a certain extent. And I'm happy I failed a bit because it turned into drama. Everything we do becomes character storytelling. And Thelma was really interesting. And it was also, I've tried to shoot digital for the first and maybe last time. But I found it interesting. We worked with CGI. We did difficult shots. It was about creating a world which was imagined. It was about working maybe with more unconscious substructures of dream imagery, stuff like that. I thought it was exciting, and we did 250 CGI shots with animals and fire and ice and glass and all kinds of difficult things, and I learned a lot. It was really a craft film that I enjoyed, and we had fun making some suspense sequences and stuff. But I also felt coming out of that I longed to go back to the more human stories of the kind of people that I knew a bit more. So I think this is, you don't know what you do along the way. You know the Kierkegaard saying that you only understand your life backwards, but you're forced to live it forwards. And I feel that with movies too. You do your best, and one thing leads to another. I'm very happy that I did Thelma, and it got me some new friends. I always look at audiences as kind of friends. Maybe that's a British pop way of looking at it. A lot of bands here have said that. But you truly feel that some people embrace your films. And there was a different crowd that got into Thelma. And I enjoyed that a lot of those conversations that came out of that.
One of the pleasures of doing events like these is the opportunity to go back and look at a director's work. And Thelma is the only one of your films that I'd not seen before. I'd missed it in the cinema, and I loved it. But what really struck me, and we've sort of touched a little bit on influences, there's this incredible prologue that I won't give anything away, but it is quite stunning how it plays out because it does something you do not expect. Then we have the title of the film, and then we cut to this long shot that becomes a zoom. that I immediately thought the opening shot of The Conversation, Francis Ford Coppola's film, Hitchcock's Notorious, Hitchcock's Young and Innocent, the use of zoom. And I loved the fact that you were wearing cinematic references really boldly throughout this film. And you can see them in the other films. And we've mentioned one or two directors, but how big a role or a part do influences play when you're preparing for a film? Is it sort of Martin Scorsese level, going off watching films again, or are you just drawing from your own memory?
I think it's mostly my own memory, really. Feelings for how I want to do it. I actually try to stay really intuitive about mise en scène, how I shoot things. It's something I've done since I was a kid. It's the language I feel I master the most. I don't feel very confident writing. I'm so happy to work with Eskil Vogt, who's such a great writer. And he helps me through it, not thereby saying that that's his role. He's also incredibly creative, and we share that responsibility equally. But he's a much better writer than me. So when it comes to shooting, that's very often how I feel I'm more comfortable with that. So, but I also know I'm standing on the shoulders of film history, as we all are, right? So. Yeah, I try not to reference literally, or at least if I do, I like The Conversation, I was aware of that long. But that's not really just a long zoom in that sequence. It's following them
It's
around.
following it, right? Yeah, it's different.
So,
yeah.
but you're right. It's the people in a big crowd and looking in a paranoid perspective, kind of Alan J. Pakula-ish from a top, which goes back to Hitchcock. And I absolutely get what you're saying. And I was trying that vernacular of paranoid and thriller, but I also looked a lot at B movies, like Italian giallo horror. I had a couple of years, so I just watched that because it was fun. I go on these kind of rabbit hole journeys into music and film sometimes, where I just get obsessed about a certain era, and I just really spend time on it, and I find it fantastic. And I watched a lot of horror movies at that time. I thought that was fun.
I do love the 10 films that you supplied for the Sight and Sound. Greatest films of all time. That obviously we run the gamut from 2001, 8.5 through to Mirror, La Notte, and then you've just got at some point Bresson's entire oeuvre. It's like I'm not even looking at one of the films. We're just going to bung them all into together. Just one single big film.
I swapped that in the most recent one.
Did you?
Yeah.
For
Tree of Life, Terrence Malick. I felt so bad not having a Terrence Malick film on the first one, so These things are impossible, my friends. I'm sure you all tried it. Oh, it's impossible.
But Trier Life, bold move.
Yeah, I know. I love that film. I was at the premiere at Cannes. And I remember some people have been booing it. It's a masterpiece.
It's an amazing film.
It's like, Terrence Malick is a big deal. I watched all of his films. He doesn't give a shit. He experiments clearly with his own project, completely. And he's a soulful, philosophical filmmaker that finds his form time and time again in different variations, and he's super important to me.
So, going on to your next film, which is The Worst Person in the World, for me it felt like you and Eskil were sort of opening out to the world. Yeah. The two most recent films you've made have gone from intense character studies with the people who exist as satellites around these people's lives to something larger. What was the original idea for that film?
I think the original idea was just I wanted to have fun making a movie, really basic. I wanted to have life and fun and music and humor and colors, and I wanted to make something romantic, and I really just wanted to make a film that has the vibe that film has. I realized the more I make movies that what I'm most interested in is the vibe of something. I know that sounds hippie-ish, but you know that everyone, if you see David Lynch, everyone gets what a vibe is. You know, like the best filmmakers have just like a sense of style that becomes an emotion, like music or something. You know, that's really the great kick. I like that kind of jazzy, loose, romantic, melancholic thing. And then I lie on the couch a bit and think about my life at that time, and I've been that person who spent a long time figuring out how to create a home life and all that, and I felt somehow that I knew Julie as another, like looking at her as a person. But then I stepped into her shoes with Eskil, and I realized that that was a really exciting character with a great existential scope, with all those possibilities and feeling kind of lost. But we were kind of rooting for her. All that chameleon changing identity thing is fantastic. I like that, as if we're also saying that she is more honest than the rest of us, because she's aware that things are ever changing. We don't quite know who we are, and I thought that was exciting. But it was also going back to some of the energy of the early work, and not having it's the fifth film, so by that time it's like, fuck it. I'm not going to be avoiding of repeating myself. If I do, I'm going to accept that I change with time and I don't have control. And if I end up repeating something and people make fun of me, that's still what I want to do.
I think Julie is one of the best creations in a film that I can think of in the last 10 or 20 years. I think, again, when I saw the film the first time, I just wanted to turn around and come back in and watch the film again. In some ways, and perhaps this obviously is just my interpretation, but she feels like your most novelistic character. Mm-hmm.
In what way?
There's so many levels that I actually feel like watching the film that I'm experiencing a really, really detailed work of fiction that's being peeled away. That it feels like there's so much thought that's gone into every aspect of her personality, that no matter what situation you put her in, she seems to organically grow out of each one.
Interesting. That's a compliment. Yeah. No, thank you, man. I hope it makes sense. And I'm super. I think also it's a film about exposing that lively person to the fact that you can't. I don't think you can really connect deeply with other people unless you accept the fact that life is also about loss.
Yeah.
And I think that's a grand statement there, people. But I think my experience, at least, again, I can only speak for myself, and I only make these characters, right? So, but I find it interesting how we connect deeper with the world through loss. And it's a story of that coming to understand that you mean something. I think at the beginning, Julie doesn't understand that she means something or is lovable. But at the end, she understands she's meant something to someone, and therefore maybe she can encounter a deeper sense of connection with other people. And that's at least the theme that we were exploring, even though we also want to have a lot of fun. Thank you.
I think that's got to be one of the most wonderful examples of show, don't tell. Don't tell us how she feels. Just show. You romantic, you.
Yes, for once. No, I am a romantic. I think I am, yeah.
Renata, some people might remember, was one of the characters who appears late in Oslo. Mm-hmm. She's perfect in this, and she won the Best Actress prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Did you have her in mind when you were writing the character?
Sure, I wrote it for her, or we did, Eskil and I, yeah. She was one of these people, I felt that she had something extraordinary. It's weird, once in a while you meet actors, and I had this with Renata. She came in for an audition on Oslo, August 31st, and after like 3 seconds, I was like, she's got something. And I was on set with her for 9 days during Oslo, August 31st, because we were shooting a whole the sun's coming up sequence, and to sustain the light, we could only shoot like an hour each day in the morning and then go do something else in the film. So I had her on set all the time, and I felt very safe around her. Like I could give her a task of bicycling in the back and doing, and she would always fill it with life and some presence. And I thought, okay, she'll fly off and become a star, and nothing happened with films on her, really. She was doing great work in theater, and some roles kind of cast as the lead female's jealousy, her husband dated a younger woman kind of type character, like really not up to her, what she could do as an actor. So that was interesting. So I wrote her this film, and yeah.
And then she also appears, obviously, in the new film, Sentimental Value.
Yeah.
And again, was that the similar thing you wrote?
Yeah, sure. She was one of the first things. I mean, when you're in a writing room, I feel pretty low at the beginning. I feel that there won't be another film. I won't do this again. And you really don't feel top of the game. And to have something to have faith in, like a great actor, is a wonderful thing. And then you can write it for that person. You can even go and meet that person and talk a bit about it, and they will say, "Oh, this is interesting." It gives a special energy. So we did that again with Sentimental Value.
And just in terms of working with her and with a script, I know you said with Anders sometimes a different line will work. Are you happy to improvise as a director, or are there limits within the process?
We don't improvise a lot. I mean, it's that loose take. Free improvisation I've almost never done. Maybe, but something happens at the end of a scene sometimes, and they'll just run off and do something better or interesting, and you stick with that. I'm not interested in the idea of controlling what happens in a moment when it comes alive. I want it to feel like life. That is not the same to say that it has to be realistic or anything, but that some event occurs where it's exciting to look at, it has a sense of energy, and it mystifies me. A lot of the time, now when I'm on the road with the new film, people ask the actors and me to explain things we've done. And the fact is, we can spend rehearsal time prepping it, intellectualizing, sharing personal stories, doing the scene on the floor a little bit loosely, video filming it, then I rewrite a bit, then we meet on set. We throw a lot of the intellectual stuff away. I just try to support them, to try to do versions. And the moment something happens, which is exciting, they can tell, and I can tell, and you're like, oh, wow, that was great, thank you. And then we move on quickly, and we never talk about it. And then it's in the film, and everyone says, oh, why did that, we don't know. It's a kind of mystery. I know how to get them into it and to help them do it. But then after that, it's just judging it, which is also why I sit next to the camera. And we shoot on 35 film, and I have a monitor, and I look at them because I believe in the sense of transference. I believe that as a director, your task is to do two things. One is to genuinely feel and judge what is happening in front of the camera and not get stuck on your idea. Again, to your question of the freedom.
Yeah.
What is really going on is the question I have to ask, or emotionally ask. What is really going on? And you go to a party and you have a friend and they tell funny stories, but you don't laugh because you sense something else is going on. And then afterwards they say, my relationship is in trouble, man. And oh, you were sad, and I felt it, and you were trying to hide it, and I didn't understand what was going on. But you feel these things, and the camera feels it. This is the wonderful empathic possibility of cinema. Not all films has to deal with that, of course, but I'm interested in that. So when something happens with Renata's face, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, that's not quite what we planned, but it was exciting and interesting, and I think I can use it. So one side of my brain is trying to go to zero and just look and feel so I can judge what are we getting. And the other side of my brain is trying to think, how can I push this onward so we can do new variations on the take? What can I say, like simple things, so that they can continue to do a couple more interesting takes? And that's the job. And some people are more interested in hitting, I see a lot of films which are more about the precision of rhythmical dialogue, and that's fantastic, that's wonderful, but that's not quite what I do.
You're a father now.
Yeah.
It did strike me, knowing that, watching this film the first time, that might be tapping into.
It's a weird. I had one daughter when I wrote this film, and then the moment we finished the screenplay, my wife and I realized we were going to have another with exactly 3 years apart, like the two sisters. So in the future, we're very worried that people are going to think this is a self-portrait of me, which is certainly not the intention. No, of course that matters. For writing a film like this, it changed me. Of course, having kids is one of the biggest things that can happen to you. And you start understanding the discrepancy between what you say and what you really say, or rather how so many things are transferred to a child and has been transferred to us from our parents and from their parents to them, and how these generational things appear that are so mysterious to us and so difficult to put into words. And trying to trace that in a story and in a movie, I thought was interesting. And this, what you just saw now, is really the middle of the film. And perhaps when they're smoking, you realize that actually the biggest conflict in the film is between Renata and Stellan's characters, the oldest daughter and the father, and that they genuinely love each other.
Yeah.
And that's the pain. That's the problem. It's really their inability to be with each other in some sense of peace that drives the main conflict of the story.
There is something quite extraordinary throughout the film about this idea of physical space between them, but emotional intimacy. You can actually see in their expressions, in what they're not saying, of just how much they love each other, but in what they say and how they act, they just can't follow through.
Yeah, the end of the film is when I knew I had a film that I want to make.
Not to give it away.
No, but it's, you know, it's I've said this before, that I feel, for example, Oslo, August 31st, it's made up against the black canvas in a way. If you peek into the depth of it, it's really dark. This one has light.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's more about reconciliation somehow than anything I've done. And love, and how complicated that is. Yeah.
There are so many different things we could talk about with this film. I'm aware we're limited with time and we want to take some questions from the audience. I've got just two elements I want to ask about. First of all, something we haven't talked about that's so important in all of your feature films, music and songs particularly. We open this film with Terry Callier's Dancing Girl and we close it with Labi Siffre's Kind of Chase. How much do you think about what songs are going to go in, or is it when you work with a music supervisor? Because they are extraordinary, some of the choices.
Oh, thank you. No, but I'm a music geek, big time. And the fact is, you know, behind this screen, there are loudspeakers. And if you mix a tune right in a film, you'll hear it in a better condition in a cinema than anywhere else and you'll ever hear it. So to be allowed to use really wonderful music is a great gift to a film. I really take it seriously. I still DJ, and I've been so of course Terry Callier is a dream that we were allowed to use that, and it had a tone that I felt also kind of folk. Are anyone familiar with Terry Callier's work? It was kind of revived through the UK actually in the 90s. Minnie Riperton, Rotary Connection was produced by Charles Stepney, and he also produced 3 wonderful albums by Terry Callier. Really worth Dancing Girl. What Color Is Love is the name of the album, and the first song is Dancing Girl. Extraordinary music. I should stop. I could go on, but yeah. And Labi Siffre is British and allowed us, and we communicated, and he gave us Kind of Chase, which is a song I'm so happy and privileged to be using in the film at the end, and he gave it to us even so that we could afford it, because it's quite a popular song. So, you know, we don't have the biggest budget in the world.
It is wonderful with Terry Callier's song at the beginning of a film, and taps into the last question I have. We've talked about the emotional depth of characters. We've talked about the way that you play with time in your films. And the idea of memory also encompasses the physical spaces. So the house that dominates this film is the house that Anders goes back to towards the end of Oslo, 31st of August. And in both instances, they're like memory palaces. It's not the clutter of people's lives. There's the odd little thing that sets off an emotion. And I know production design is something you think an awful lot about in your films. But this house is quite extraordinary. Could you talk a little bit about it?
I agree. We have the wonderful production designer, Jørgen Stangeby Larsen, who also did Oslo August 31st.
Yeah. Who
did a great job, and he also made the whole of the 20th century. You know, every decade really. He dressed in a replica studio of the house that we built outside of town. But I'm interested philosophically in the idea of place. Again, going back to your early questions about memory. Don't we all need a staging for our memories? And haven't you all encountered that you think of some event in your life and the chronology of it is a little bit hard to catch, as if time doesn't manifest clearly, but you remember where it was and you can kind of feel the mood again, like the mood of films. or the place. I know that I can have dreams still about places I've lived that I'll probably never go back to. As if we need a staging, we need a specific place for our memories to be who we are. So we are extremely tied to the physical space that we surround ourselves with. It could be strange corners of streets or an entry point of a childhood home where we saw seasons change, winter, summer, where we came in and we were heartbroken or we were in love or we, this or that. And it all happened in the same space. And it's tied to that somehow. Again, the sense of phenomenological identity. So to me, that's, again, without being able to understand it quite or explain it quite, I know how it works in movies. And in this film, this house, yes, you could intellectualize it and make it a literary discussion, that it could be an allegory, or is it just represent time or the 20th century or whatever, fine. But it's also specific. It's a house. It's those hallways and those rooms and those windows that I repeat in a certain structure, kind of in control and kind of out of control, and that creates the fundament of the movie. There is no film like this, the kinds I make with actors and places, without the spatial treatment. And that has emotional significance. And it's just, it's hard to put into words, but that's what we do when we make movies, I think, is to play with space like that. And in this one, it was fun, because that house is quite extraordinary. I've often asked myself, I come from a family line of people that have had addiction issues. I haven't had it myself, but I've been very close to a lot of people that I loved, both that I've lost and that have survived. I know a lot of survivors. I know a lot of tough people that have been understood that toughness is about vulnerability and self-love, and I care about that theme. So thank you for sharing that. But you're not alone, and we're all grappling with different things and mechanisms in our human experience of being. We compare our own inside with others outside, and I don't think society is making that less so at the moment. I think we're quite good at seeing the others as more successful or functioning than ourselves. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to make Oslo August 31st was to try to, create something where I showed someone that was kind of cool and lovable and yet kind of messy, because those are the people that I know that have addiction issues. So thanks for sharing that, man. I don't know if I can quite give a full answer. It's such an individual, specific thing when I create characters with my team, my collaborators, and with the actors. And the mother-son versus the father-daughter. What I'm playing a little bit with in both of the cases is that there's a differentiated gender balance that manifests in that difficult relationship into the child's relational pattern in their love life. And that then becomes quite similar, since it's a father towards a daughter, and in this case, people that are straight, and they have difficulties figuring out their love life in a way. I think that's something that reminded me of each other when I wrote those two films, in a way, that admiration of the difficult parent. But I think, my problem is very often when people ask me about writing women or men, or I don't see it as different. I'm sorry. It's like people stories, and I've tried to find characters, and there are so many aspects to human experience of a character so gender is one of them, of course, and I try to be specific about those things, but I don't think about it as a system that I can kind of rest on. So a mother will be like this, or a father will be like that. But thank you for bringing that film up. I appreciate it. It's material. Places are also material. like actors in a way. It sounds cynical, but it's not meant in that way. It's the most fantastic material that you can find with a camera, you know. So it's material. I know my city very well, and I know how the sun moves because I've walked along those streets at all times of year. You know, I'm 51. I've had some time to look at streets, and so often when we write, I get a sense already of almost as if the street or the place has a feeling in itself. That's the ground basis of the scene. And then if I know a bit about is it evening or morning or how's the light, and I start getting a vibe from that. And then showing it to you is rather simple, isn't it? I just film it, and I hope that someone wants to look at it. But I'm glad you feel there's a coherency. I will add this, though. At home in Norway, some people are a little bit sad that I'm always the one being put forward as the representative of a city that could have so many different stories. So again, the generational question, I'm always cautious about, I mean, I have a very subjective view on Oslo. Some people find that I beautify it, or that it's in terms of class, it's a specific, some areas where people are more well-off than others, and all of that is true probably. But that's, again, the stories that I can tell, and I've always encouraged and tried to support filmmakers to tell other stories in the city as well. So, but I appreciate that it translates and that you felt connected to it. Thank you. I guess that's what we find the most fun almost, is to try to come up with stuff like that. Again, the virtues, the idea that how can we make some formal, playful scenes that get into the mind of the characters, but they have to be interesting and good scenes, you know, and that's it. But yeah, that's the formal thing, you know. I know that people often find when you say formal, at least in the UK, almost more than in the US, I find that that's interpreted as a cold, distant, manipulative, skillful thing you do with an image and an edit or something. But I feel when I talk about form, it's really that everything has to have a form, and that you have to find a warm, inclusive, hopefully quite original form, and then you can get closer to the feeling of how it is to be on mushrooms or something.
So there was no method direction going on there. You were like dropping acid all the time doing mushrooms.
No,
See what it felt like.
I'm too neurotic for that. But, yeah, good question, man. Thank you. No, there's a lot of music I play on set that I probably couldn't even afford, including that song. I love Talking Heads. And some really great songs that we have just paid for, even though they're expensive. But Terry Callier, for example, I played. I play music a lot on set. Like, for example, the whole sequence you saw with Renata running around, she responds very well to kind of rare post-disco 1981 to 1984 New York underground.
Well, that is really specific.
Yeah, no, because I'm a DJ, so I realized like she loves kind of low-tempo disco, like 96 BPM till 114. So that's, and she said, oh, that's a great tune, and I was playing that a lot because it had kind of a groove which wasn't too hectic. So yeah, that's the specific example. And then classical music, jazz, you know, sometimes also to calm everyone down before the actors arrive, so the vibe on set when the actors come into the room is in the right place. Because actors are so sensitive, you know, to what's going on. And we have the AD team. I have a wonderful team of ADs. I actually have 3 first ADs that I work with on this last film that do different things all at once. And we try to create a path from the holding area, the trailer or the green room, wherever the actors are, that's clear, so they don't have to encounter people on their phones or eating sandwiches or being stressed onto the path to hit in front of the camera. So then to play music and make the vibe right. Also for myself, I get into the mood, you know. So that's how I use music.
Sentimental Value, as Justin said, is released in the UK on the 26th of December, also known as Boxing Day. I strongly recommend that you take your families to see it, because even if you don't get on, you can at least point at the screen and say, at least we're not as bad as those. It's being released by Mubi, and you can see the Oslo trilogy of Oslo's 31st of August, Reprise, and The Worst Person in the World on Mubi. But all of your films are available to watch online. I strongly recommend that you watch them over and over again. Thank you to the BFI for organising this, but most of all, can you please join me in thanking Joachim Trier?
Thank you so much. That was lovely. Thank you. Thank you.